Welcome to another episode of Grace on Tap. Grace on Tap is a podcast dedicated to the history and the theology of the Lutheran Reformation, all over a nice cold beer. I'm Mike Yagley.
And I'm Evan Gaertner.
So we just finished talking. Our last episode was on 1518. Of course, Martin Luther posted the 95 Theses at the end of 1517. So 1518 was the opening shots coming from the Catholic from the Pope, and then also was how Frederick managed his way through that. 1518 was where the sides were sort of drawn, and
there's this Diet of Augsburg. There's the context of trying to have Maximilian rally power for this crusade against the Turks, but Maximilian is also trying to rally power to secure the election of his grandson Charles, and Frederick is largely manipulating time throughout 1518 to create
opportunity.
Yeah, to make sure that Luther isn't quickly judged.
And of course, the Pope wants everybody to rush to judgment, get it done. But Frederick very, very wisely maneuvers to use the friendliness, the openness of the other princes to come to Luther's side and to sort of tell the Pope, you know what, you're moving a little bit too fast. Let's give this some thought here. And so we have this environment where Frederick's able to maneuver around the Pope's desires, and the Pope is very frustrated.
And although they're good friends, Maximilian was extremely Machiavellian, so Frederick knew he couldn't be trusted. Still, Emperor Maximilian was better to deal with than Pope Leo, because Maximilian does have an interest to kind of keep German power in Germany.
So the critical event of 1518 it's funny because when you look at Lutheran historians, they'll talk about the meeting with Cajetan as being the critical event. And that was part of this Reichstag.
That's that interview that takes place in kind of a room.
Altenburg.
And Luther and Cajetan are talking in Augsburg.
Yeah. Augsburg, yeah. But there was a lot going on in this Augsburg Reichstag beyond just Luther. Luther was sort of an afterthought, and that's sort of lost on us in modern, when we look back in this era. That is the most important thing that happened.
Because we're kind of historian of theology.
Yeah. But what really happened for the people who were there, it was, are we going to go to war against the Turks? Are we going to elect Charles as the Maximilian's son Charles as the king? There's all these discussions that were much, much bigger for the people who were there. And again, Frederick uses all that to make time for Luther.
So nothing really came out of the first interview with Cardinal Cajetan, except the Pope realized he wasn't going to be able to bully Luther into submission.
And in the second interview with Karl von Militz, Luther agreed to stop criticizing the Pope if the Pope would stop criticizing him. Luther also agreed to write a letter admitting that he had spoken too sharply and to encourage everybody to follow the Pope. Lastly, Luther agreed to have his case judged by a Roman Catholic archbishop. And I think that's where we left off.
That's where we left off. And the key thing for Luther was he did not want to be condemned prior to being able to speak.
Right. And so you have this Luther, Frederick is making time for Luther, and Luther is trying to he's using that time to try to come to some sort of agreement with the Pope. And it's just not working out, but that's going to continue.
So now we're going to go towards Augsburg's closing up. The Reichstag is finishing. And the Pope's representatives have been interviewing Luther. Cardinal Cajetan's been doing that. And the Emperor is leaving the Reichstag.
And this is getting in, and I hope to cover this actually a little bit in the last time. I think I talked about it briefly at the beginning of the last episode, but we got so many good things to talk about. So the Emperor is leaving the Reichstag. And if you look at a map, the Emperor is going to a town called Linz, Linz. And he's leaving from Augsburg, and if you go, there's a straight line. You could go from Augsburg to Munich, and then go straight to Linz. But Frederick goes all the way down south to Innsbruck.
The emperor.
The emperor. You're right. The emperor goes south, and he adds a lot of time. I was trying to figure out why he went to Innsbruck, which adds probably comes close to doubling the trip. If you look at a map, it's pretty close to doubling the trip, and
so the emperor stops in Innsbruck,
and he wants to stay in Innsbruck, right? But because he's abused
his line of credit,
there,
the merchants won't serve him until he pays his outstanding debts. So rather than being able to kind of rest and have revelry in Innsbruck, he has to keep moving on to Linz.
Right. And so off the emperor goes to Linz. And the stop in Innsbruck, if you look at this, Innsbruck is in Austria, by the way. So it looks like, and Austria is run by the Habsburgs.
Which is Maximilian's family.
This is Maximilian's family. So it looks like Frederick is working his way down south because he doesn't want to spend any money. He wants to go where he has more leverage.
The emperor is going down.
The emperor. I keep saying Frederick. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
The emperor looks like he's going down to Innsbruck because he has more leverage with the people there because he doesn't want to spend any money, and he's
still, though, not helped. Even though he's in his home territory,
right?
His lack of a line of credit catches up to him, and so now it's a hard wintry ride. The emperor had to stop in Wels, just a day outside of Linz, on December 10th, 1518.
Right.
And then he ends up dying in Linz on January 12th, 1519.
That's right.
So in the biography of Frederick the Wise that we've been kind of looking at as we prepare these episodes, there's not an explanation for why Maximilian travels. He's 130 miles out of the way. We notice that Innsbruck's kind of in that Habsburg territory. Maybe he's trying to deal with some family stuff. Whatever it is, he goes south to avoid maybe traveling through where a lot of German princes were. We don't know, but what we do know, it was winter.
And it cost him his life.
And that extended trip cost him his life. So now in the empire,
Luther was the big deal, but now he's nothing. It's like, okay, who's going to be the new emperor? And so 1519, at least the from January until Charles III is elected, this period is all about, and even I would probably say even beyond that, because there's the dealing with what's Charles going to do. This whole period is all about the emperor and not so much about Luther.
So the princes of Europe, they use the death of the emperor as an opportunity to kind of settle old scores, call in debts, trying to figure out, are you with me or are you with them? There's a lot of counting of votes that's going to happen here, and handing vote if you give me this, and also people doubly promising, even as I promised to you to give me my vote, I also promised to this guy. So Frederick has kind of a key vote in electing the next emperor, and he becomes the critical negotiator in all of this.
There is a sidebar that's the in the book. He goes into a lot of detail in this Hildesheim feud. And
tell us more about the Hildesheim feud.
And I think it took a lot of Frederick's time, but it was sort of emblematic of what was happening at this time. The emperor had negotiated a lot. There's a lot of princes who wanted to go to war with each other for whatever reason, and the emperor had sort of constrained them by A, B, or C, by maneuvering this and maneuvering that. Well, once the emperor's out of the picture, all these fights start. And so the Hildesheim feud...
the husband of Frederick's sister, it always involves the sister and the brother-in-law. Somehow brother-in-laws, I don't know. I've got great relationship with my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law, but let's just imagine now that some people don't. The husband of Frederick's sister, Marguerite, joined an alliance with the Bishop of Hildesheim to go to war with a couple princes over some petty insults. So you have Frederick's brother-in-law has joined with the Bishop of Hildesheim to create a war.
Right. So in the book, he goes pages and pages on this Hildesheim feud. And I tried to boil it down to like, what
does really matter? Here, Frederick's trying to stay out of it because it's his brother-in-law's war. It's not his war.
But he was a regional vicar. And so what that means is that he was, without the emperor in charge, he had to handle this region and all the different political problems in this region. So so now he became sort of king of this region.
So he allows the people to kind of have their own little war for a little while because he doesn't want to get tangled up. He doesn't want to be shown to be on one side of the war or another. They're small skirmishes. They maybe have the potential to grow into bigger battles. When Frederick's cousin George, who's in charge of ducal Saxony, and Philip of Hesse now add their resources to the fighting, now it gets into a bigger deal. And Frederick has to order the fighting to be stopped.
Yeah.
And so if you want to learn more about the Hildesheim affair, go into your own little rabbit hole. But I like this little moment of interlude where you realize Frederick the Wise is trying to elect the next Holy Roman Emperor, secure the life of Luther, advocate for the Reformation so that there's time for people to hear the word of God, and he's got to deal with his brother-in-law's war.
Right. And it's
this reminder that Frederick the Wise it's not politics today. There's these family things that maybe I don't know, though. You got Trump and Trump Jr. You've got Biden and his son.
Yeah.
Family dynamics still go into things.
Yeah, but this took a lot of his time dealing with these people who just wanted to kill each other and literally kill each other. And he's like, what are you doing? Yeah, he just stop. Just stop being idiots. And so they did eventually. They eventually, but you're right. In the middle of all these hugely consequential things going on, he also has to deal with this little just petty stuff that ends up taking a huge amount of his time. It's really fascinating to sort of go through life in Frederick's shoes for a couple of months, and it's like, oh my goodness,
So anyway. Frederick, he works to rebuff all the other responsibilities he has to deal with, including the Hildesheim feud. He tries to get them all settled so he can completely focus on the election of the emperor.
So there are two main competitors. First is King Francis of France, and I've often wondered if France is named after Francis. I don't know.
It's the Frankens, all right.
and then of course Charles Charles of Spain. And then there's a third one, sort of a black horse which is Henry VIII is also in this at that time.
Because he hasn't annulled his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. He hasn't created the Church of England yet. He is still a power to possibly be. And if he becomes the Holy Roman Emperor plus the King of England, maybe there's something there.
Now, all of this begins on June 11th, 1519. There's not a lot of documentation on the negotiations.
But going into the election, we do know this. The King of France thought that he has a chance. He's got 2 solid votes from the electors of Trier and Brandenburg. And the French king also has the advantage that the King of Spain was a Habsburg. And 2 of the swing votes, Albrecht of Mainz and Ludwig of Palatine, hated the Habsburgs.
So yeah, you've got basically 4 votes out of 7. You only need 7. And so there's like these 2 guys.
There's 7 voters.
There's 7 voters.
And the King of France thinks he's got 4.
He's got 2 locked up and 2 that hate the other side. They might not like Charles. They might not like Francis, but they really hate the Habsburgs. And Charles is a Habsburg.
So there's some glimpses into the proceedings. After one day of negotiations, Albrecht of Mainz approaches Frederick, wondering if the election could even take place due to all the bribery that he notices. That tells us, even though you don't have details, but the fact that one guy says, "I'm not sure if this is fair.
Yeah.
This isn't kosher.
So, and they're supposed to not be, it's actually in the rules, there's no bribery, right? You're not supposed to have any bribery.
Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah.
Say no more.
And you have one of the, and I thought that this was Albrecht of Mainz, was one of the people we just talked about.
And he's the one that's worried about the bribery.
Yeah.
And then at one point in the negotiations, the Elector from Trier, who was a strong supporter of the King of France at this point, announces that he's changed his mind, and now he's going to ask Frederick to be the emperor. So he wasn't one of the three that we talked about going into June 11th. We had Henry VIII, we had King Charles, and King Francis.
Right.
Frederick wasn't really an announced candidate.
No. Now, and what's happening is Frederick is managing everything that's going on.
He's trying to be the kingmaker.
And it appears, of course, there's no records, nobody really knows, but it appears that the other people who were the other electors in the room looked at him and said, "Why can't you just be the emperor? Because you're a faithful man, you're honest, you're fair, you're wise. Why can't you just be the elector?" And so you start getting this, and Frederick wants nothing to do with it.
So then one of the solid votes that King Francis thought he had, so Trier, who was a solid vote, now says Frederick maybe, and then Brandenburg, who also was supposed to be a solid vote, suddenly is becoming a supporter of Frederick. So Francis thought he had two for sure, and then two that hated.
Yep.
The Habsburgs. But now the two for sures are not for him anymore.
Not for sure anymore. Yeah.
They're now advocating some support for Frederick.
Right.
And now Ludwig of Palatine, he's one of the guys that hated the Habsburgs. He's becoming a swing voter.
Yeah. And he says, at least it appears, at least the little bit of documentation that we've got, it looks like he also threw his support to Frederick. So now Frederick's got 3 votes, and he only needs 4.
And so if Frederick votes for himself, he's got 4 votes.
He's got 4. He's all set.
And so if Frederick votes for himself, he's got it.
And so this is, again, there's no documentation, but one of the interesting things is there's an envoy from England, Richard Pace, who was representing the interests of Henry VIII. And he once said that Frederick was, for 3 hours, elected the Roman king. And so there is this, there's a period of time here where Frederick could be the emperor.
But Frederick kind of knows if he's the emperor, then he's got to deal with the emperor's problems.
Yeah, and he's too smart for that.
He's got incredible power during the negotiations. His fingerprints are seen. But all of this would then result in the Habsburgs becoming an enemy of him. And the Habsburgs do have power. Even if they might not have all the electoral votes at this moment, they still have a lot of power.
Oh, yeah.
And so if Frederick gets Trier and Brandenburg and Ludwig and votes for himself, he's got the 4 votes, but then he makes the Habsburgs an enemy.
Right. And so Frederick sort of gracefully steps away and negotiates to give the emperor position to Charles III. Or Charles V. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Charles V. So Charles, who's the king of Spain, he wins.
Yeah.
But in order for Frederick to push the vote to Charles, they make Charles agree to 34 articles.
And all of these weaken the emperor. So one of them was, there was this imperial governing council that was supposed to have power that was shared with the emperor.
But it hadn't been convened for a long time.
Right.
So it was power on paper, but not power in reality.
So they have to revive that. Charles has to revive that, and he agrees to it. He can't make alliances without consent of the electors.
So Charles can't go to the Pope and say, the Holy Roman Emperor is going to be on your side if you do this. He can't make that kind of promise unless he's first talked to the electors.
Right.
No new taxes.
No foreign militaries, which, that's basically mercenaries. You can't.
If you're going to win a war, you're going to win it with us.
That's right.
And if you can't convince us to battle, you can't place us into debt by harrying another army.
Right. And then the last one, well, not the last one, there's 34, but another big one was that he had to improve the financial status of the electors.
If you're going to become the emperor and I'm going to elect you to be the emperor, you got to make me richer.
Yeah.
All right. So now Charles was the king of Spain. The Spanish are not super excited that their king has been elected the Holy Roman Emperor. They're furious.
When they see these 34 rules, these 34 agreements that he's got to abide by, they're furious.
Because they thought they had an advocate. Charles is going to become an emperor, and now Spain's going to become wealthy. But instead of Spain becoming wealthy at the end of this, Germany's going to become wealthy at the end of this.
Yeah. So you have this. Even though he was successful at negotiating through the election of Charles, Frederick couldn't catch a break, though, in the middle of all this.
And one day after the election, the brother-in-law's war, the Hildesheim feud, flares up again because the truce which was negotiated with Frederick was declared null and void.
Yeah, now that Frederick had a position of, we'll say, stronger authority when the emperor had just died.
He was the regional vicar, and he was essentially the king of Germany for a while.
Yeah, and and then when the emperor was put in place, all of a sudden he went back to being just another prince, and they go back to war.
So Frederick's brother-in-law, Heinrich Luneburg, and the Bishop of Hildesheim immediately attacked the princes who had insulted them. Heinrich and the bishop won the battle, and they took over 100 nobles hostage.
So, and the losers appealed to Frederick to reduce the cost of the ransom to get the nobles back. And this is like crazy.
This is hostage 101. I'm going to take someone, and I'm going to ask for a lot of ransom. And meanwhile, the people who are ransomed are going to use their friends to try to appeal to a third party and negotiate a reduced ransom. What does Frederick do?
Well, he negotiates another peace between
but
the
meanwhile,
bunch of them,
he gets sick.
And then he gets sick. And
he's got a fever, he's got colic, he's got gout, he's got some sort of, quote, stone issue.
Yeah, whether it's a
kidney stone, gallbladder, something's going on.
He's not feeling good. So
great time for a beer break.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so the beer that we're featuring here is called Stout Constitution. It's a cream stout from Bottle Rocket Brewing, proudly brewed in Seward, Nebraska. For all of our listeners that are from Michigan, because Mike and I both live in Michigan, there's a number of people who listen from Michigan. I'm sorry to say you cannot buy this in Michigan, but it is brewed in Nebraska, and I was in Nebraska to celebrate my son Henry graduating college, and in the basement of my wife's aunt and uncle, the basement fridge had some of this beer. And before I left, I filled my cooler with some of this beer and brought some back to Michigan.
And it is delicious.
So what describes this beer? The Stout Constitution, a full-bodied, silky smooth cream stout, not the typical stout you have to chew. The roasted malts produce the chocolate and coffee flavors, and the dark hue, lactose sugars give it a residual sweetness, offsetting the bitterness created by the roasted malts.
So they have a picture on there of the Founding Fathers. They have a picture of the Founding Fathers enjoying a nice stout as they draft the Constitution, and that's just what they think has actually happened here. So we'll buy into that.
The Bill of Rights are being celebrated. That's what I know.
So good beer and really enjoying it. Cheers.
So Frederick the Wise has kind of bring some peace to the Hildesheim feud. 100 nobles ransomed, ransom prices reduced.
He gets sick.
And now we still got some Luther going on.
So Spalatin goes to Luther and asks him to write something to comfort Frederick during his illness.
George Spalatin is been a friend of Luther, but he's also Frederick the Wise's essentially political liaison.
His right-hand man.
His
basically.
chief of staff.
Yeah. And so it really, and I know we've mentioned it before, but might as well say it again. Frederick is very proud of the fact that he's never directly spoken with Luther.
It gives him a hear no evil, say no evil, speak no evil kind of. I don't know this Luther you guys keep talking about. I haven't met him. Are you sure he's as bad as you say? Have you heard him?
I've heard some stuff. It's about theology and I don't really understand it, but I've talked to people who do, and there's
a lot of people in universities that seem to like what he says. Yeah, I think we should just let him write some more.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into all this thing. And
So Spalatin asks Luther to write something to comfort Frederick because Frederick's not feeling well. So Luther responded with a book called The 14 Consolations.
Now, we did an episode, actually, on the 14 Consolations, and it is really sort of interesting. So this was Luther actually. This is the first time I read this, that Luther actually suspected that Frederick asked for something, not because he wanted to be comforted, but because he wanted to keep Luther from writing more incendiary things.
Yeah, write something about me so you stop writing something about them. But
That might have been true.
maybe it could be true. We're not exactly sure. There's evidence, though, that Frederick does enjoy Luther's harsh writing style. Frederick would send tracts that had some of these harsh styles of Luther out to others to read. But when you're sick, maybe you don't always want the firebrand Luther. You want the comforting Luther.
Yeah, yeah. So while Frederick was sick, there's this whole big episode on the 14 consolations. It's very interesting, but we'll keep moving. You can go back and review our old episodes on that. But while Frederick is sick, Andreas Karlstadt got Luther roped into a debate with John Eck in Leipzig.
So Andreas Karlstadt is one of the professors at University of Wittenberg. He's kind of the provost of the university, but Karlstadt, we'll find out, is kind of clumsy, and probably one of the most important sermons that have ever been preached is the Invocavit sermons that Luther's got to write in answer to the clumsy reforms that Karlstadt does.
And Karlstadt decides he's going to go into. He agrees to to have a debate with John Eck
In Leipzig.
Now, John Eck has been asking to debate Luther directly. Luther had this promise to the Pope that I'm not going to speak badly about you.
This was the Karl von Militz.
This was the whole Karl von Militz thing. And Luther has this agreement. I'm not going to say anything.
If you don't say anything bad about me, I'm not going to say anything bad about you.
Right.
So Luther's kind of been hands off.
So Luther's pulling back, but we have Andreas Karlstadt jumps at the chance to have this debate, and that sort of pulls Luther along into this debate, and so they all go to see.
So they're traveling. Imagine that Karlstadt and Luther are all traveling from Wittenberg to Leipzig. Something happens where Karlstadt drops all of his notes in the mud when his wagon arrives in Leipzig. And Karlstadt was dependent on his notes.
Yeah. So Karlstadt did not come up with, he didn't fully understand Luther's theology. He had a lot of notes, he had a lot of books, and he had pieces of paper, and they fell into the water.
So the debate starts. Karlstadt's clumsy. The locals in Leipzig seem like they're going to support Eck. They're cheering him on because he was able to get Luther to admit he supported some of the teachings of Jan Hus.
Oh, we should take a step back. So Karlstadt starts out with the debate, and he's fumbling with his notes, and so
because everything's out of order.
Yeah, Eck says something, and it takes Karlstadt forever to have an answer, and he's fumbling with his notes. He can't find anything, and so Luther finally gets frustrated and actually enters the debate with Eck directly, and at that point you've got it's on.
Yes, that's right. Now Luther, who wasn't going to be in this debate, has been brought into the debate because he doesn't have the patience to watch Karlstadt fumble and lose the debate.
He is not Frederick the Wise. Frederick would have let this whole thing play out and just sat quiet and laughed. But Luther can't do that. Luther jumps in and gets into this debate with Eck.
So I had kind of jumped ahead, but I talked about John Hus.
Yes, that's at the end. Yeah,
John Hus was someone that about 100 years earlier had been condemned at the Council of Constance and killed. And so everything that John Hus now is colored by the label heretic. But John Hus wasn't fully a heretic. I mean,
he wasn't a heretic.
He wasn't a heretic. But the idea is the ad hominem attack. If you can make it sound like Luther and John Hus are the same, then you get to call, because you call John Hus a heretic, and if you can get Luther to agree with John Hus, then A to B, now Luther's a heretic. And that's what the crowd thinks, that Eck has successfully attached Luther to Huss's label of heretic.
So and it's interesting because we had the whole episode on the debate at Leipzig, right? And that was sort of the writings that I got from that period about that. That's sort of what I walked away with. But this book actually had a quote from one of the professors at the University of Leipzig, who was going into the debate. They were more friendly toward the Pope's position, toward Eck's position. And so you have this professor and he says, Eck's credit has received a great blow among us on account of the disputation. Almost everyone here now is more kindly disposed toward Luther than before. So, previously I thought that Eck had been able to use the John Huss thing to get the crowd against Luther. But this quote makes me think that at least the professors who understood, that might have been true about the crowd.
The zinger might have been John Huss, but the actual argument, Luther is winning.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
So now the rest of 1519 is a turning point in Luther's thinking. His intense preparation for the Leipzig debate to support Karlstadt and then ultimately to speak on his own self has crystallized his perspective on several subjects. He becomes more and more convinced about the sacraments, which Babylonian captivity is going to write about. 1519, 1520, these become the years of amazing writing from Luther.
Yeah.
His pace of writing, his quality of writing, his clarity of writing, they are all zeroing in on what happens when the church is defined by power instead of by Jesus.
Now, this begins the big thing that Luther, there's a lot of things that he starts really speaking out more boldly about, but the big one is communion in both the bread and the wine. And in this era...
And that was the attachment to John Huss.
That was the attachment to John Huss. And in this era, the priests could only have the wine, the laity could have the bread, and now Luther's saying, what is that all about? Where is that in the Bible? Everybody should be able to have both the bread and the wine. This was scandalous, even to Frederick. Frederick was shocked by this idea that
the blood of Christ is so holy. How could it be in the possession of people so common? And this movement towards a priesthood of all believers that Luther starts to develop, this language that all of us in our baptism are a part of the kingdom of God equally through the righteousness of Christ and not by our works, means that we are all equal to be able to be possessors of the body and blood of Christ. That the blood of Christ is not preserved and set aside only for the sanctimonious priests, but in fact it's given to all of us because of in our weakness we need it. So the sacraments don't become this thing you receive at the end of a race because you work so hard for them. Now the sacraments are starting to be described as the thing you get at the beginning. And this is a shift in the way the sacraments are being described as no longer a reward, but in fact the very nourishment you need.
Right. Yeah. So Luther starts talking about this kind of stuff in 1519, in late 1519. Frederick is scandalized by it, but just as Frederick does, he doesn't act quickly. He stops, he thinks it through, he talks to people, and he starts getting okay with it. But then other
we have
things
this
happen.
letter. We have this donation of Constantine.
Right.
And a lot of this is going in, who really has power? There is supposedly this document that Emperor Constantine in the 300s transferred his secular authority to the Pope. And then the Pope loans it back to the emperor. But the concept of this donation of Constantine is that ultimate secular and theological power is in the hands of the Pope. And any power any king has, any power any emperor has, is only on loan from the Pope. And the Pope can take it back at any moment of need.
So there was this guy called Hutton.
Ulrich von Hutten.
Now, there was back maybe 60 years prior to all this, they had discovered that the donation of Constantine was a forgery.
In 1457.
Right.
Seems like long enough ago that it should be stated fact.
But obviously, the people in positions of power really weren't interested in letting this get out.
So that 60-year-old proof found in 1457 was not allowed to be distributed.
Right.
So you have Ulrich von Hutten finding out that the donation of Constantine was a forgery, and he explains how it's a forgery, and someone says, that's a great idea. Let me have that piece of paper that you've used to demonstrate it's a forgery. Ulrich von Hutten gives him the piece of paper, and then the person he gives the paper to hides it. And so for 60 years, this proof that the donation of a forgery is largely getting hidden. It wasn't seriously discredited until Hutten and Luther, it starts to get publicly exposed more. So this donation of Constantine becomes exposed through publicity as a hoax.
During this, yeah. And a lot of it has to do with the invention of the printing press, right? And so now everybody knows that that this donation of Constantine is a forgery.
And that fits into the skills of the humanist movement, which is look at the quality of your sources. Utilize your best sources for your best arguments. And if there is going to be an argument made that the Pope has this power, then we've got to have a source for it. All right, what's our source? It's this donation of Constantine. Well, let's look at this. Is it a valuable source? No.
Right. It's a forgery.
It's a forgery.
And so this whole thing this really, if you want to talk about the Pope getting angry, and Luther gets on board with advertising that this is a forgery. And so now the Pope is absolutely furious. And he really decides to come after Luther with everything he's got. So that pretty much takes us to the end of 1519. The Pope is absolutely furious at Luther and Hutten, but mostly Luther. And
because Luther has helped publicize the fact that the Pope is a priestly authority, not a secular authority.
Yeah. And so here we go. This is where things really start heating up in 1520, where the Pope goes after Luther with everything he's got, and Luther comes back with everything he's got. Cheers.